Buddhist science is a study on Buddhism based on facts and science.
The process of dependent origination, as an operating system of life by Venerable Rungruan Papartsaro, Dr. Rungruan Lim Chu Patapa. The Buddhism is the only religion in the world that describes a life in terms of processes and states of mental phenomena happening in nature. The aim of Buddhist study is the study about the mind. This study relies on having mindfulness to make an insight observation on arising mental phenomena within the mind. And since these mental phenomena must be caused by the law of cause and effect, therefore each part of mental phenomenon is connected as a series of arising phenomena of the process of dependent origination. On the day of enlightenment, the Buddha performed an insight observation, and discovered the secret of mind processing in dependent origination, reflecting on how a life was functioning as it really was. This discovery led to have a clear understanding of the origin of all mental defilements within the mind processing, and by doing so he had a clear knowledge of how to resolve all the arising problems completely. And this is the reason why the process of dependent origination is considered as one of the great knowledge on the day of the Buddha's enlightenment. The process of dependent origination explains the total landscape of mind in terms of mind processing. The mind processing starts from the interface of life with the world at the six sense bases, and once the mind interfaces the world, then the mind proceeds to immediate respond with an operating system of mind throughout the mind processing. At this time, we can realize that the arising and cessation of a series of the objects of consciousness has a certain pattern of mind processing which is dependent to each other, and these series of events are dependently processing step by step. This specific pattern of mind processing is called the process of dependent origination. The process of dependent origination is a pattern of logical process acting as an operating system of mind, describing a series of dependent origination of mind in terms of processes and states occurring during the mind processing. Therefore, in order to understand how the mind working, it is necessary and sufficient to comprehend the whole process of dependent origination so that we can identify a particular stage of mind where the problem is originated, and then we can apply a proper action to resolve the problem correctly. The process of dependent origination can be presented in terms of a series of the chain reactions of processes and states within each part of the mind components. A system of mind is just like any regular phenomenon in nature that can be described in terms of process and state. A mind is a stochastic process functioning like a frog jumping on lotus leaves in a pond, and every time when the frog jumps on different lotus leaf, a mind is changing from one state to another stage, so the mind is impermanent. Also, a condition of each phenomenon will arise, and stay for a short while before ceasing, as a common characteristic of deteriorating of each phenomenon. Therefore it appears that there is a course of a process that changes to a new state of mind. In this analogy, the mind is a stream of consciousness with a series of associated states, so-called mental factors in Buddhism. One of the greatest discovery of the Buddha on the day of enlightenment was that these changing states of mind has a certain specific conditionality pattern, so-called the process of dependent origination. This process of dependent origination executed like an operating system of mind, of which a mind will function in repeated patterns starting from the beginning of mind processing at the six sense bases throughout a pattern of mind processing, so-called the process of dependent origination. As a matter of fact, it takes almost 3,000 of years before the modern neuroscience to discover the dependent complexity of mind functioning in human connectome research study. By viewing this natural process, a life is a series of various states of mind, including feeling, perception, and volitional formations. In conclusion, a life is composed of the five aggregates of being, which interact with each other in terms of the process of dependent origination of states and process starting from receiving stimulus in the world, and then processing within a mind in a certain path of consciousness depending on individual conditions, until finally taking action responding to the world. The Buddha explained about the process of dependent origination as a series of arisen phenomena within a mind as follows.
I will teach you dependent origination and dependently arisen phenomena. Listen and attend closely, I will speak.
Yes, Venerable Sir.
Those monks replied. The Blessed One said this.
And what is dependent origination? With birth as condition, aging and death, comes to be. That element still persists, the stableness of the Dharma, the fixed course of the Dharma, specific conditionality.
A Buddha awakens to this and breaks through to it. Having done so, he explains it, teaches it, proclaims it, establishes it, discloses it, analyzes it, and elucidates it. And he says,
See. With birth as condition, aging and death arises. With existence as condition, birth arises. With clinging as condition, existence arises. With craving as condition, clinging arises. With feeling as condition, craving arises. With contact as condition, feeling arises. With the six sense bases as condition, contact arises. With name and form as condition, the six sense bases arises. With consciousness as condition, name and form arises. With volitional formations as condition, consciousness arises. With ignorance as condition, volitional formations arises.
That element, of phenomenon, still persists, the stableness of the Dharma, the fixed course of the Dharma, specific conditionality. A Buddha awakens to this and breaks through to it. Having done so, he explains it, teaches it, proclaims it, establishes it, discloses it, analyzes it, and elucidates it. And he says,
See. With ignorance as condition, volitional formations arise. Thus, the actuality, the inerrancy, the invariability, the specific conditionality in this. This is called dependent origination. And what are the dependently arisen phenomena? Aging and death is impermanent, conditioned, dependently arisen, subject to destruction, vanishing, fading away, and cessation. Birth is impermanent, conditioned, dependently arisen, subject to destruction, vanishing, fading away, and cessation. Existence is impermanent, clinging is impermanent, craving is impermanent, feeling is impermanent, contact is impermanent. The six sense bases are impermanent. Name and form is impermanent. Consciousness is impermanent. Volitional formations are impermanent. Ignorance is impermanent, conditioned, dependently arisen, subject to destruction, vanishing, fading away, and cessation. These are called the dependently arisen phenomena. When a noble disciple has clearly seen with correct wisdom as it really is this dependent origination and these dependently arisen phenomena, it is impossible that he will run back into the past, thinking, did I exist in the past? Did I not exist in the past? What was I in the past? How was I in the past? Having been what did I become in the past? Or that he will run forward into the future, thinking, will I exist in the future? Will I not exist in the future? What will I be in the future? How will I be in the future? Having been what will I become in the future? Or that he will now be inwardly confused about the present thus, do I exist? Do I not exist? What am I? How am I? This being, where has it come from, and where will it go? For what reason? Because the noble disciple has clearly seen with correct wisdom as it really is this dependent origination and these dependently arisen phenomena. Each part of dependent origination, namely, ignorance, volitional formations, consciousness, name and form, six sense bases, contact, feeling, craving, clinging, existence, birth, aging and death, is impermanent, conditioned, dependently arisen, subject to destruction, vanishing, fading away, and cessation. A noble disciple has clearly seen with correct wisdom as it really is this dependent origination and these dependently arisen phenomena.
In this sutta, having a clear understanding with correct wisdom as it really is this dependent origination and these dependently arisen phenomena is to have a clear understanding as follows. Firstly, the Buddha explained on what were the dependently origins of phenomena of ignorance, volitional formations, consciousness, name and form, 6 sense bases, contact, feeling, craving, clinging, existence, birth, aging and death in mind processing. Secondly, the Buddha explained on what were the collectively dependently arisen phenomena of each individual phenomena, that is, each of them is naturally impermanent, conditioned, dependently arisen, subject to destruction, vanishing, fading away, and cessation. Although it is already fading away and cessation, but it dependently causes an associated phenomena to arise respectively. And finally, by having a good understanding of the dependently origin and the dependently arisen phenomena, then there is no confusion of the past, the present, and future of a life, of where has it come from, and where will it go. That is, a life is just a natural process of being with no self. There is no self of being someone in the past, or of being someone to be in the future, but there is only dependently origin that is happening at the present moment, which is a dependently arisen phenomenon. In Buddhism, a life is not only viewed in terms of the 5 aggregates of being, but also considered in terms of mind processing, and even as a particular arisen phenomenon which impermanent, conditioned, dependently arisen, subject to destruction, vanishing, fading away, and cessation. The Buddha introduced the threefold study strategy to study on the truths of life within nature in order to gain wisdom to resolve all kinds of arising problem within the process of dependent origination. In the light of the discovery of the process of dependent origination, it was the first time that we scientifically understood that a life was natural process as it really was. This was not a miracle of any spiritual power, but it was a masterpiece of the greatest discovery of mankind to understand the mind processing that we can be put in simple words as follows.
Starting from the contact of the mind with stimuli from the world to our sense organs, then causing a feeling with a sense of struggling due to craving, desire and lust to assume a self of perception to be involved with the matter. Then the mind will mix the matter with our memories of information of individuality to have a deeper understanding and involvement with the matter in thinking before deciding to take an action to respond to the world.
Can we imagine that this discovery happened in almost 2,600 years ago, and at that time there was no any knowledge of psychology, no neuroscience as we have nowadays, and somehow the Buddha was able to precisely identify the whole mind processing in details? As a matter of fact, we start to learn and understand the science of mind just a few decades ago. The discovery of the process of dependent origination reveals 4 main important facts of life as follows. 1. A life is a natural process constantly receiving information from a surrounding environment, and then responding by taking certain action to the world. A mind is a natural mind processing of dependent origination driven by a stream of consciousness. And the process of dependent origination is a common pattern of mind processing as sort of the mind operating system repeated in many rounds until it is saturated and responding by taking an action to the world. 2. Each part of dependent origination is caused by a certain dependent origination. It is not controlled by anyone who can dictates what a life will be, therefore there is no such a self or a super self who creates or controls any activities happening within this mind process by wishing. The process of dependent origination reflects a reality of life that a life is no self, but it is a natural process. For this reason, it is clear that a self is just an assumption derived from desire and lust to have someone to be involved with the matter of what is happening in the world. The assumption of self seems to be justified for a simple living in nature, however, when complicated with desire and lust for personal power and personal wealth, then driving an individual being to become greedy, hateful, and delusive from the truths of life within nature, and then causing the being to take wrong actions in responding to the world and consequently making all kinds of man-made problems to the world. 3. The process of dependent origination highlights the root cause of all mankind problems within the world, because whatsoever actions we take to the world are due to the decision of mind, and then whether a mind will be wholesome or unwholesome depending on the mind processing. Therefore, if we determine to resolve problems in life, we have to fix the root cause problem at the mind processing of dependent origination. The process of dependent origination explains that an origin of mind processing starts with a minor error of finest defilement of misunderstanding on the truths of life within nature at craving, clinging, and ignorance, respectively. Therefore, if we determine to resolve this mind processing problem, then we have to correct and fix the arising contaminant of defilement at these three parts of the process by the threefold study strategy. And by doing so, the mind processing will be cleansed, so-called a liberated mind from troubling problem, or a purified mind from any contaminant of defilement, and then the mind will instruct the body to take a right action to the world, and as a result all suffers will be eliminated from life. For by having a good understanding of the process of dependent origination, we can clearly realize that what causing problems of the mind is originated at the craving, clinging, and ignorance of the mind processing, and then as the mind keeps on this pattern of processing for several rounds, the problem will be increasingly aggravated into mental defilements of the 5 hindrances of desire for sensual pleasure, ill will, depression, anxiety, and doubt. And finally the mind turns to be an unwholesomeness with greed, hatred, and delusion before bursting out into wrong actions responding to the world, and causing suffering to life and the world. 5. The finest defilements of taints can be eliminated by the applications of the Four Noble Truths implementations at the 3 critical parts of the process of dependent origination, including the application of the Four Noble Truth for the cessation of the taint of desire for sensual pleasure at craving. The application of the Four Noble Truth for the cessation of the taint of existence of the 5 aggregates subject to clinging. The application of the Four Noble Truth for the cessation of the taint of ignorance at ignorance. In conclusion, what makes an individual person to be good or bad, it is not because of an influence of any spirit or angel or ghost or demon, but it is a matter of how we can learn the truths of life within nature, and then improving the quality of life correctly by having wisdom. The Buddha suggested that we should always have a mindfulness monitoring on what happening in the mind processing, and if detecting any arising problem, then immediacy applying a proper knowledge to eliminate the arising problem at all times. This is a real Buddhism to bring peace to the world. The discovery of the process of dependent origination in Buddhism was the greatest discovery of the mankind in an ancient time of more than 2,600 years ago to understand on how a mind was operating, and it was the first time that we viewed the mind and life from a scientific view as a natural process. The Buddha introduced the first scientific study of life in terms of mind processing. The process of dependent origination scientifically described on how a mind changed from one state to another state by a process of consciousness step by step in a circulatory of a signal processing, that is, whatever volitional formation of internal mental phenomenon within a processing eventually will flow back for a next round of internal batch processing. The descriptions of the process of dependent origination of the mind are similar to the operating system of Central Processing Unit, CPU, in computer science, with a repeated routine of the mechanism of consciousness executed along with the mind processing, then generating varieties of mental conditions. The mind is a system consisting of various components performing several specific functions such as feeling, perception, and volitional formations. The object of consciousness in this case is an informative signal that flows passing various components within the system with an attached token ring after clinging, and the system executes a perception with stored memory, and performs a huge data processing of thinking in volitional formations. However, in the case of mind, there is no specific physical location for consciousness like a CPU in computer, but it is an abstract biomechanism of consciousness in everywhere as processing along the pathway within the central nervous system. In Buddhism, the defilement is defined as a misunderstanding of assumed self that contaminates the mind processing, and as the mind is processing in various parts of the system, this contaminant is increasingly aggravated the whole central nervous system. Therefore, the goal of the Buddhism is to purify the mind from any arising defilement within the system, especially as early as possible at the origin of taint within the first round of the process of dependent origination. The discovery of the process of dependent origination reveals the root cause of the problem within the mind processing, and then leading to way to resolve the problem correctly with wisdom. And this is the foundation of the cessation of defilement by wisdom in Buddhism. What a mind will be merit or not can be determined by how the mind is processing, if it is functioning in a correct direction or not. The Buddhism strategy to eliminate defilement is by studying on the mind in the threefold study strategy by performing an insight observation on the mind processing in the process of dependent origination, and by having a knowledge on how to resolve the arising problems correctly at craving, clinging, and ignorance. Then process of dependent origination will be collapsed, and then the mind will be liberated and be able to take action responding to the world correctly without any problem. The Buddha understood the whole mind system very well in terms of what are the causes and effects of a particular state of mind with detailed conditions of dependent origination step by step. The descriptions of the dependent origination of life in mind processing is a very unique and genuine discovery of what the life is in an ancient time without having a modern scientific equipment we have nowadays. It is the first time that we view and understand the life from a scientific perspective in terms of mind processing. It is quite interesting to notice that although everyone has a mind, and the mind is processing in such a dependent condition as described in the process of dependent origination, however none of us even being aware of what is happening within the mind because most of us trapped into an emotional part of the process, just feeling into such condition. On the day of the enlightenment, the Buddha improved the mindfulness reaching the purified mindfulness, and being able to perform an insight observation tracing the whole mind processing starting from the beginning at the six sense bases through the end, so he completely understand the nature of the mind. In recent neuroscience study in Human Connectome Project, we just discover that the mind is just a mind processing, and it has a certain structural pattern of mind processing so-called the structural connectome or the brain pathway, which is clearly derived from the process of dependent origination in Buddhism, and as the mind is processing along the specific portion of the pathway, then it arises an associated state of mind, depending on the type of neurotransmitter in the functional connectome, which is identical to the mental factor in Buddhism. All of these scientific discoveries lead to the conclusion that the mind is a natural processing, and it is no self. The Buddha called the one who was skillful in maneuvering the abandoning the unwholesome processing or rerouting from the unwholesome pathway by having a mindfulness to pay attention on an appropriate wholesomeness to correct the mind processing as the master of the mind. The process of dependent origination illustrates a fundamental characteristic of mind that although a mind is a stream of consciousness, but it functions as a batch processing of a specific matter of object of consciousness in relation to the five aggregates of being which will arise and fade away in each round of the process of dependent origination. Therefore, if we can stop clinging with the matter of this object of consciousness, then when the mental phenomenon fades away there will be no more renewal of internal mental phenomenon within the dependent origination anymore, and this is the most effective way to collapse the process of dependent origination. This may sound very simple, but it takes a tremendous effort in performing a Buddhist practice by having an insight observation to gain an insight wisdom to instantly having a mindfulness to bring wisdom to cope with the object of consciousness rightly, and then being able to respond to the world rightly as well. The notion of the process of dependent origination has two interpretations. The first one is about the mind operating system of dependently arisen phenomena within the mind as described in specific conditions of states of mind. The becoming of existence here is the sense sphere existence of an object of consciousness starting in the 6 sense bases. And in this implication the states of birth, decay, and death in the process of dependent origination are a birth, a decay and death of the matter in relation to an observed mental phenomenon within the mind. The original description of the Buddha on the process of dependent origination was intended to study on the reality of mind from an insight observation in the threefold study strategy on mind study. This study led to an important discovery that a contaminant of defilement is arisen at the craving, clinging, and ignorance of the process of dependent origination, and if we realize that the mind is indeed no self with the matter, then we can let the observed mental phenomenon fade away naturally within reactivating a renewal of the matter with ignorance in volitional formations, then the mind will be liberated. This is a very critical insight wisdom in the last part of the wisdom study on threefold study strategy, on how to eliminate any arising defilement in the mind. In Buddhism, the second part of the threefold study strategy of the mind study is specifically about to have an insight observation in the Buddhist practice, the contemplate on the process of dependent origination of the mind, so that we can fully contemplate on how the mind is functioning in every instance of the operating system of mind, and by knowing the origin of an arising contaminant of defilement, then we can apply the Four Noble Truths to assert a proper solution strategy in order to resolve the arising problem within the mind correctly, and this is so called, the cessation of suffering in life by wisdom. The second interpretation of the process of dependent origination is the description of becoming of existence in terms of form sphere existence and formless sphere existence, and the birth, decay, and death in the process of dependent origination here is a birth and death of a matter of life, and the process of dependent origination is turned out to be applied for the description of a cycle of life as a broad perspective of an operating system of life by viewing volitional formations as collective actions including bodily volitional formations, verbal volitional formations, and mental volitional formations in responding to the world under the law of karma.